The Mysterious Stranger by Mark Twain. But it was Father Peter, the other priest that we all loved best and were sorriest for. Some people charged him with talking around in conversation that God was all goodness and would find a way to save all his poor human children. It was a horrible thing to say. Why? Because wouldn't a just God regard the correct beliefs, the correct practices of everybody? The particular circumstances of everybody that will raise or lower the merit or demerit or reward or punishment of a particular matter. But there was never any absolute proof that Father Peter said it, and it was out of character for him to say it, too, for he was always good and gentle and truthful. While having a difference in opinion doesn't mean untruthful necessarily. He wasn't charged with saying it in the pulpit where all the congregation could hear and testify, but only outside and talk, and it is easy for enemies to manufacture that. Father Peter had an enemy, and a very powerful one, the astrologer who lived in a tumbled old tower up the valley and put in his nights studying the stars. And, well, you can be an astronomer without being, just making up stuff about the stars. But it turns out that that thing in the Bible about a third the clergy, nowadays, I'm not sure that you can even call about a third of Christian clergy Christians. I mean, I've talked to people off camera, and yeah, a notable percentage, I'm not sure they could be called Christian. I mean, they'll call themselves the term, but the divinity of Jesus thing or being required or something significant that they're telling the congregation, they don't necessarily believe, even a wider portion, something significant. Of course, being a liberal preacher, but yeah, even with that, even with the acceptance of liberal Christianity as the main form of Christianity, everyone knew he could foretell wars and famines, though that was not so hard. There was always a war and generally a famine somewhere, but he could also read any man's life through the stars in a big book he had and find lost property, and everyone in the village except Father Peter stood in awe of him. Because the systems of correspondences, if you're really good with them, then you can say stuff that's going to be generally true and that sort of stuff, and you can put your beliefs and read the reactions and, operate like that with that sort of stuff. Even Father Adolf, who had defied the devil, had a wholesome respect for the astrologer when he came through our village wearing his tall pointed hat and his long flowing robe with stars on it, carrying his big book and a staff which was known to have magic power. The bishop himself sometimes listened to the astrologer, it was said, for besides studying the stars and prophesying, the astrologer made a great show of piety which would impress the bishop, of course. But Father Peter took no stock in the astrologer. He denounced him openly as a charlatan. I did a program, Astrology Without Idolatry, and I do refer to the Bible in this. And yeah, that type of astrologer would not be allowed in any revealed religion, but, the type that this person obviously is. A fraud with no valuable knowledge of any kind or powers beyond those of an ordinary and rather inferior human being, which naturally made the astrologer hate Father Peter and wished to ruin him. It was the astrologer, as we all believed, who originated the story about Father Peter's shocking remark and carried it to the bishop. It was said that Father Peter had made the remark to his niece, Margaret, though Margaret denied it and implored the bishop to believe her and spare her old uncle from poverty and disgrace. But the bishop wouldn't listen. He suspended Father Peter indefinitely, though he wouldn't go so far as to excommunicate him on the evidence of only one witness. And now Father Peter had been out a couple of years, and our other priest, Father Adolf, had his flock. Those had been hard years for the old priest and Margaret. They had been favorites, but of course that changed when they came under the shadow of the bishop's frown. Many of their friends fell away entirely, and the rest became cool and distant. Margaret was a lovely girl of 18 when the trouble came, and she had the best head in the village and the most in it. She taught the harp and earned all her clothes and pocket money by her own industry. But her scholars fell off one by one now. She was forgotten when there were dances and parties among the youth of the village. The young fellows stopped coming to the house, all except Wilhelm Meidling, and he could have been spared, and she and her uncle were sad and forlorn in their neglect and disgrace. And the sunshine was gone out of their lives. Matters went worse and worse. All through the 2 years, clothes were wearing out, bread was harder and harder to get, and now at last the very end was come. Solomon Isaacs had lent all the money he was willing to put on the house, and gave notice that tomorrow he would foreclose. Chapter 2. 3 of us boys were always together, and had been from the cradle, being fond of one another from the beginning, and this affection deepened as the years went on. Nikolaus Baumann, son of the principal judge of the local court, Seppi Wolfmeyer, son of the keeper of the principal inn, the Golden Stag, which had a nice garden with shade trees running down to the river side and pleasure boats for hire, and I was the third, Theodor Fichter, son of the church organist, who was also leader of the village musicians, teacher of the violin, composer, tax collector of the commune, sexton, and in other ways a useful citizen and respected by all. We knew the hills and the woods as well as the birds knew them, for we were always roaming them when we had leisure, at least when we were not swimming or boating or fishing or playing on the ice or sliding down the hill. And we had the run of the castle park, and a few had that. It was because we were pets of the oldest serving man in the castle, Felix Brandt, and often we went there nights to hear him talk about old times and strange things, and to smoke with him. He taught us that, and to drink coffee, for he had served in the wars and was at the siege of Vienna, and there, when the Turks were defeated, driven away, among the captured things were bags of coffee, and the Turkish prisoners explained the character of it and how to make a pleasant drink out of it. And now he always kept coffee by him to drink himself, and also to astonish the ignorant with. When it stormed, he kept us all night, and when it thundered and lightened outside, he told us about ghosts and horrors of every kind, and of battles and murders and mutilations and such things, and made it pleasant and cozy inside. And he told us these things from his own experience largely. He had seen many ghosts in this time, and witches and enchanters, and once he was lost in a fierce storm at midnight in the mountains, and by the glare of the lightning had seen the wild huntsman rage on the blast with his spectre dogs chasing after him through the driving cloud rack. Also he had seen an incubus once. Maybe didn't want to give the rest of the details because what a incubus or a succubus is, right? And several times he had seen the great bat that sucks the blood from the necks of people while they are sleeping, fanning them softly with its wings and so keeping them drowsy till they die. While vampire bats typically keep their prey alive, actually. He encouraged us not to fear supernatural things such as ghosts, and said they did no harm, but only wandered about because they were lonely and distressed and wanted kindly notice and compassion. And in time we learned not to be afraid, and even went down with him in the night to the haunted chamber in the dungeons of the castle. The ghost appeared only once, and it went by very dim to the sight, and floated noiseless through the air, and then disappeared, and we scarcely trembled. He had taught us so well. He said it came up sometimes in the night and woke him by passing its clammy hand over his face, but it did him no hurt. It only wanted sympathy and notice. But the strangest thing was that he had seen angels, actual angels out of heaven, and had talked with them. Now, we don't know whether he means Malaka or Jinn because of, the limited conceptions that we have in the West of any distinction. But they had no wings and wore clothes and talked and looked just like any natural person, and you would never know them for angels except for the wonderful things they did, which a mortal could not do. Now the Damans, even the jinn among those metaphysical beings, Daman as in far as what the Greeks call it, and the way they suddenly disappeared when you were talking with them, which is also a thing which no mortal could do. And he said they were pleasant and cheerful, not gloomy and melancholy like ghosts. It was after that kind of a talk one May night that we got up next morning and had a good breakfast with him, and then went down and crossed the bridge and went away up into the hills on the left to a woody hilltop, which was a favorite place of ours, and there were stretched out on the grass in the shade to rest and smoke and talk over these strange things, for they were in our minds yet and impressing us, but we couldn't smoke because we had been heedless and left our flint and steel behind. Well, they weren't using tobacco in the 1500s, right? This is supposed to be? Yeah. Soon there came a youth strolling toward us through the trees, and he sat down and began to talk in a friendly way, just as if he knew us. But we did not answer him, for he was a stranger, and we were not used to strangers and were shy of them. He had new and good clothes on. He was handsome and had a winning face and a pleasant voice, and was easy and graceful and unembarrassed, not slouchy and awkward and diffident like other boys. We wanted to be friendly with him, but did not know how to begin. Then I thought of the pipe and wondered if it would be taken as kindly meant if I offered it to him, but I remembered that we had no fire, so I was sorry and disappointed. But he looked up, bright and pleased, and said, "Fire? Oh, that is easy. I will furnish it." I was so astonished I couldn't speak, for I had not said anything. He took the pipe and blew his breath on it, and the tobacco glowed red, and spirals of blue smoke rose up. We jumped up and were going to run, for that was natural, as we did run a few steps, although he was yearningly pleading for us to stay, and giving us his word that he would not do us any harm, but only wanted to be friends with us and have company. So we stopped and stood, and wanted to go back, being full of curiosity and wonder, but afraid to venture. He would go on coaxing in a soft, persuasive way, and when we saw that the pipe did not blow up and nothing happened, our confidence returned little by little, and presently our curiosity got to be stronger than our fear, and we ventured back, but slowly and ready to fly at any alarm. He was bent on putting us at ease, and he had the right art. One could not remain doubtful and timorous, where a person was so earnest and simple and gentle and talked so alluringly as he did. No, he won us over, and it was not long before we were content and comfortable and chatty, and glad we had found this new friend. When the feeling of constraint was all gone, we asked him how he had learnt to do that strange thing, and he said he hadn't learned it at all. It came natural to him, like other things, other curious things. What ones? Oh, a number. I don't know how many. Will you let us see you do them? Do, please, the others said. You won't run away again. No, indeed we won't. Please do, won't you? Yes, with pleasure, but you mustn't forget your promise, you know. We said we wouldn't, and he went to a puddle and came back with water in a cup which had made out a leaf, and blew upon it and threw it out, and it was a lump of ice the shape of a cup. We were astonished and charmed, but not afraid any more, and we were very glad to be there, and asked him to go on and do some more things, and he did. He said he would give us any kind of fruit we liked, whether it was in season or not. We all spoke at once. Oranges, apples, grapes. They are in your pockets, he said. And it was true. And they were of the best, too, and we ate them and wished we had more, though none of us said so. You will find them where those came from, he said, and everything else your appetites call for. And you need not name the thing you wish. As long as I am with you, you have only to wish and find. And he said true. There was never anything so wonderful, so interesting. Bread, cakes, sweets, nuts, whatever one wanted, it was there. He ate nothing himself, but sat and chatted, and did one curious thing after another to amuse us. He made a tiny toy squirrel out of clay, and it ran up a tree and sat on a limb overhead and barked down at us. Then he made a dog that was not much larger than a mouse, and it treed and It treed the squirrel and danced about the tree, excited and barking. It was as live as any dog could be. It frightened the squirrel from tree to tree and followed it up until both were out of sight in the forest. He made the birds out of clay and set them free, and they flew away singing. At last, I made bold to ask him to tell us who he was. An angel, he said, quite simply, and set another bird free and clapped his hands and made it fly away. A kind of awe fell upon us when we heard him say that, but we were afraid again. But he said we need not be troubled. There was no occasion for us to be afraid of an angel, and he liked us anyway. He went on chatting as simply and unaffectedly as ever, and while he talked, he made a crowd of little men and women the size of your finger, and they went diligently to work and cleared and leveled off a space a couple of yards square in the grass, and began to build a cunning little castle in it, the women mixing the mortar and carrying it up the scaffoldings and pails on their heads, just as our workwomen have always done, and the men laying the courses of masonry. 500 of these toy people, swarming briskly about and working diligently and wiping the sweat off their faces as natural as life, in the absorbing interest of watching those 500 little people make the castle grow step by step and course by course and take shape and symmetry. That feeling and awe soon passed away, and we were quite comfortable and at home again. We asked if we might make some people, and he said yes, and told Sepe to make some cannon for the walls, and told Nikolaus to make some halberdiers with breastplates and greaves and helmets, and I was to make some cavalry with horses. And in allotting these tasks, he called us by our names, but did not say how he knew them. Then Sepe asked him what his own name was, and he said tranquilly, Satan. And he held out a chip and caught a little woman on it who was falling from the scaffolding and put her back where she belonged and said, she is an idiot to step backward like that and not notice what she is about. It caught us suddenly. That name did. And our work dropped out of our hands and broke to pieces a cannon, a halberdier, and a horse. Satan laughed and asked what was the matter. I said nothing. It only seemed a strange name for an angel. He asked why. Because it is. It's his name, you know. Yes, he is my uncle. And what is this one? The Shathaniel? I think there's probably both in the mythology, but he said it placidly, but it took our breath for a moment and made our hearts beat. He did not seem to notice that, but mended our halberdiers and things with a touch, handing them to us, furnished, and said, don't you remember? He was an angel himself once. Yes, it's true, said Sepe. I didn't think of that. Before the fall, he was blameless. Well, all the jinn were blameless before the fall, but they were still jinn. They didn't change from Malacca to jinn. They didn't change to be fire beings from light beings, although fire can be pretty bright, right? Yes, said Nikolaus, he was without sin. It is a good family, ours, said Satan. There is not a better. He is only member of it that has ever sinned. Well, I don't think that's how the story really goes, but